Hi, I'm Todd with AutoCustoms. Today we're going to be installing the MaxTrac 7-inch suspension lift on this 2011 Ram. It's a combination of a 4.5-inch spindle lift and a 2.5-inch spring lift. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so we've already got the truck up off the ground, got the tire off. First thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the caliper. We're going to use a 21mm socket. We're going to take off the caliper with 2 bolts. Okay, next we're going to zip tie the caliper out of the way and make sure we don't put too much pressure on that caliper brake line. You got the spin nuts on the rotor, the spin locks. We can go ahead and pull those off of there. Next we need to remove the rotor. Depending on the age of the vehicle, you may need to use a little bit of a hammer to break it loose to get it off. All right, first thing we did is we used PB Blaster on all of our bolts to make sure everything was able to come off easily since it's an older vehicle. Now we're going to use a 21mm to take off the nut and a 10mm to stabilize that bolt as it's coming through. And then we're going to remove the steering arm first. Next we're going to break the steering arm loose. We're going to hit the side of the spindle with a hammer. Make sure you don't hit the threads on here with a hammer, just the side. It's going to pop that loose. All right, next we're going to remove these 3 bolts to hold the hub unit on the front with an 18mm socket. We're going to remove the ABS sensor using a 5mm Allen wrench. Okay, now the ABS sensor is also attached to the spindle in the back. We're going to pull that out of the way. Now we're going to use a 24mm wrench to loosen but not remove the bottom nut from the bottom of the spindle. Next we're going to use a 21mm wrench to remove the top nut. We're just going to loosen it up this time, and we're going to use a 10mm to hold the shaft in place. We're just loosening it up at this time, not removing it. Now we were fortunate enough on the top one that it just broke itself loose. If it was stuck, we would hit it on the spindle on the side with a hammer up top. Okay, next what we're going to do is remove the 21mm nut from the top ball joint. What that's going to do is going to create tension on the bottom one so that we can knock that loose and break it free. We're going to strike the spindle right here to break it loose from the ball joint. Now we're going to use a 13mm to unbolt the bottom side of the shock first. Next we're going to use an 18mm wrench to loosen the top nut on this shock. Now the shock is just going to drop right out of the bottom of the lower control arm. Now we're going to use an 18mm deep well and remove the nut that holds the end link in place. We're going to hold the nut still with an 18mm. We're going to come up below it with an 8mm, and we're going to spin this nut off. Okay, we've done the same thing on the other side. Now we can rotate the sway bar out of the way. Now we're using a spring compressor to compress the spring down so we can pull it out from between the lower control arm and the frame cup. Due to limited space, we had to use 1 spring compressor on the inside of the coil. Now that we've got the spring compressed, we're going to go ahead and remove it from the vehicle. It may be necessary to pry down on the lower control arm in order to get the spring out. All right, going to the strut, we're going to go ahead and remove the bushing from the bottom of the strut. We're just going to take a socket, put it underneath to hold on to the housing, and then a socket and put it on top of the bushing itself. We're going to take a hammer and start working that through. All right, next we're going to take some grease. We're going to lube up the inside of the bushing. Once we have that lubed up, we're going to squeeze that bushing a little bit and force this piece down in there. Next we can take and lube up the outside of the bushing. Okay, next what we're going to do is we're going to take our lubed up bushing, set it in place over top of the strut. We're going to take a deep well socket that fits over top of the bushing. We're going to tap it into the strut. Okay, now we're going to have some included spacer. It's going to slide down on top. I'm going to take a little bit of grease, run it onto the spacer, throw a bushing on top of there, grease on top of the bushing, and take our other spacer, grease on top of that. Bushing will set in place there. Put some grease on top of the bushing. We're going to set this to the side until we're ready for it on top. Okay, now we're going to reset the cap. If you got an older vehicle and you've already got a spot worn in the cap, go ahead and rotate that around to where you can put a fresh spot, have a nice fresh place to wear into. Now we've got the spring compressed. We're going to go ahead and lower the lower control arm. Fit it up in place. Want to make sure that the spring is rotated into the bottom position where it was from the factory. Now we can go ahead and remove the spring compressors. Okay, next we're going to take our new shock. We're going to run it up through the bottom. We're going to get it lined up to the hole in the top. Once we do that, we can replace our factory hardware with it back in with a 13 millimeter. Next, we're going to go ahead and put a jack underneath the lower control arm. We're going to raise it up. We're going to make sure we're not lifting it off of any kind of support. Next, we can go ahead and run that down through the top. We can put our nut on top of there. That's a supplied nylock nut. Using a 17 millimeter wrench over top of the nut. We're using a 5 millimeter Allen key, and we're going to go ahead and tighten that down. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to reassemble our hub bearing unit. The way we're going to do that is we're going to take our factory bolt, run it through the top hole in the spindle. We're going to line that up to the threaded hole in the hub unit and get those threads started. Once that's started, then we're going to go to our provided bolts, and those are going to go to the other two holes. Provided bolts will also have provided washers. Now we're going to use a 22 millimeter to go ahead and tighten the supplied hardware. All right, next we're going to go ahead and start tightening down our factory bolt. We're using 18 millimeter for that. Next we're going to lift the new spindle onto the lower control arm. I'm going to set that nut in place. Now we've got it started, we can use a 12 millimeter to stabilize the bolt on the lower ball joint. Okay, so the trick here is we're going to take our factory 21 millimeter nut, we're going to set it up in place, we're going to slowly push that ball joint stud down through to where you can catch that nut. So we're going to use a 21 millimeter wrench to hold the nut in place, and then we're going to use our 10 millimeter and tighten it down with the shaft. Next we're going to go ahead and reattach the steering arm. We're going to use the 21 millimeter socket, and we're going to stabilize with the 10 millimeter. We've reinserted the sway bar end link to the lower control arm. We're going to tighten that up to this with an 18 millimeter. We're going to grip it up at the top with a channel lock. Okay, so what we're going to do is going to go first back to the brake line. We're going to break that loose with a 12 millimeter wrench. We're going to come down below there to the brake line bracket, and we're going to loosen that up with 13. Once we've got those loosened up, we're going to come to the caliper itself. We'll break that loose with a 15 millimeter. attach the new brake line. So we're going to go ahead and put this clip in place. We're hammering it in. Once that is installed, we can go ahead and tighten down our brake line fitting. Now we're reinstalling the ABS sensor using the 5mm Allen wrench. Okay, so next we're going to use the provided clamp. We're going to take our nut or our bolt and run it through, line it up to the threaded hole on the new spindle, and set it in. We're going to tighten that down using a 10mm wrench. Next we're going to reinstall the brake caliper and rotor using a 21mm socket. Next we're going to go ahead and completely remove the brake line, the factory brake line, from the caliper. Make sure we take off the factory crush sleeve as well. All right, next we're going to reroute the new brake line. We're going to take our factory bolt and we're going to put the new crush washers on it on either side. We're going to route the brake line to go up over the caliper. We're going to tighten that down with a 15mm wrench. And next we're going to take our supplied bracket, go around the brake line, we're going to loop it up towards the top of the spindle, and take our supplied bolt, run it through the bracket, into the threaded hole on the spindle. We're going to tighten that down with a 10mm. Okay, now going to the rear of the vehicle, we've already got the vehicle up in the air, got the tires off, we've got the axle supported by a jack stand, and what we're going to do next is we're going to remove the shocks on both sides. The bottom bolts come out with a 21mm. Top portion is also secured with a 21mm. Next we're going to use an 18mm to release the sway bar end link from the frame. All right, next we're going to remove the brake line bracket from the frame using a 13mm. We're going to repeat this on the other side. Next we're going to unclip the ABS wire guides from the frame on both sides. On the 21mm, we're going to unbolt the track bar from the frame and separate it. Next, we're going to the passenger side exhaust pipe coming out of the muffler. We're going to actually pull that down, remove that out of the way so we have more clearance. We're going to use a 15mm deep well socket to do that. Now we're going to go ahead and remove the exhaust from the hanger. So next, we're going to measure up 4 inches from the hole for the track bar. And go 4 inches up, and then 1 1/8 inch in from the center of that hole. First, we're going to drill through with a pilot hole, then follow it up with a 7/16 inch bit. So we've gone ahead and mounted up the track bar extension bracket temporarily. We had to put the bolt through with a nut on the other side, and up at the top through the new hole we just drilled, we put in the bolt. We're going to pull this bracket. You can see there's a little bit of play. We're going to pull it this way and then use our marker. We're going to mark a hole on the back side so we know where we can drill a 1 inch hole. We're going to pull it back apart and drill a hole. All right, now we're going to go ahead and install the track bar extension bracket. We're going to go first set the two top bolts, the front and the back. So we got the bolt with washer. On the inside we got a washer and then the lock nut. Be the same on the front side of the bracket as well. Next we're going to go to the bottom. We're going to run the bolt with a washer, go through and put the crush sleeve in the center, and washer and lock nut on the back side. Just going to reach up with a 5/8 inch wrench on the inside. On the outside use a 5/8 ratchet, 5/8 ratchet. We're going to keep pressure on the bottom of the track bar to keep it straight. And for the bottom bolt, we're going to use a 3/4 inch on each side and tighten it down. All right, now we're going to install the sway bar drop bracket. What we're going to use to install that is the bolt that held on the bracket for the brake line from the factory. We're going to install that at the top. And we're going to use provided hardware at the bottom. Washer on both sides. And then also the provided lock nut. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and retighten the top bolt with a 13. Next bolt down, we're using 7/16. It's on the inside and the out. And finally, we're going to reinstall the brake line bracket into the bottom hole using provided hardware. And we'll tighten that down with 13mm tools. Next, we're going to install the factory ABS line back into this provided hole. So next we're going to reattach the track bar. We're not going to tighten it at this time. We won't tighten it until the vehicle is down on the ground. Next we're going to go ahead and drop the rear axle and remove the back springs. Next we're going to reinstall the sway bar end link using the provided the factory hardware. You tighten this up with 18mm hardware. Now we put the factory hat back onto the spring. We're going to raise it up into place and install the rear springs. Next, what we're going to do is going to go ahead and grease the inside of the bushings on the shocks. We're going to insert the sleeves, do it to all 4 bushings on both rear shocks. Now we're going to reinstall the new shocks. We're going to do the boot or shaft side to the top and body to the bottom. We're going to use the factory hardware the same way they came out. Now that we got the back buttoned up, we went ahead and reattached the exhaust. So we went ahead and checked our nuts and bolts in the front and the back, went ahead and put the vehicle on the ground. We bled the brakes, also went and bounced on the bumper a few times to set that track bar, and we tightened it in place. Next step is to take it and get it aligned. If you have any questions, call the experts. We're here to help you out.